Leigh Douglas. Hello, how are we?
Hello. Oh my God, do you feel a bad moon rising?
I do indeed. Welcome back, listener, to Queer Gals Watch The West Wing with myself and the lovely Leigh. And this week we will be discussing Series 2, Episode 19 of The West Wing, A Bad Moon Rising.
Dare I say a new top episode for me?
Agreed. Like when I was doing some reading online, which is always kind of tough because I'm so scared of spoilers, there is so much love out there for this episode. And I think rightly so. I would like to say that I'm kind of enjoying in this season that we're having quite a lot of like musical reference-based titles.
Yes.
And it's kind of fun that like this episode is a Creedence Clearwater Revival song. Like the lyrics of the song really work. But
interesting. I'm not a shockingly, as I was just talking about my trip to Disney last week, I'm not a Creedence girly myself. So I wouldn't have been aware of any particular lyrics.
All I'm going to say, Leigh, is it's a bop, the song. Like it's the lyrics are dark, but the song itself is a real jam. I would recommend.
Amazing.
Should we just like delve straight in? Because I'm so excited to talk about this episode.
It. Let's do it, yeah.
Cool. So the previously on, unsurprisingly, is focusing again on Jed's MS reveal to Toby and the worry that it's going to cause sort of like a genuine legal issue. Now, I thought, oh, here we go. Lionel Tribby is going to be back on our screens with his cricket bat. But Leigh, we go one better.
We go one better.
Character alert.
I am immediately obsessed with Oliver Babbish.
This is possibly one of my most loved cold opens in the show. So welcome to the West Wing, Oliver Platt. Leigh, I love Oliver Platt. This dude is everywhere. He's done everything. A little bit of a Hollywood legend of screen, big and small.
He's got such a great face. I know that's like not the beginning and the end of it, but like such a great face.
His face has like gravitas. He plays Uncle Jimmy in The Bear currently. Stunning turn in that. Phenomenal performances. But Leigh, what I think you would love to know is that he's in Love and Other Drugs.
That's where I know him from.
He's also, Leigh, in Dangerous Beauty.
No.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that film has haunted my dreams.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my God, no. I also know him from Modern Family.
Yes. And a very fun tidbit of information about Oliver Platt is they tried to do an American version of The Thick of It.
Yes.
And they did a pilot episode. I don't think it got picked up. And he was cast as Malcolm Tucker.
That is so interesting. I see that.
And so, so this is Oliver Platt joining the West Wing as Oliver Babbish. Stunning, beautiful, welcome. I love him. May he be a recurring character.
If we needed to replace the insane sword-wielding man, then I support this.
Yeah. And as you said in our shared doc, he's Ainsley's boss.
Yeah.
Which is kind of fun.
I'd love a shared scene between this man and Ainsley.
Me too.
I would love that.
I hope we get that in the future. I love that we kind of meet Oliver on, he's about to go on vacation to a kind of conference thing he's being sent on. And his EA is like trying to hustle him out of the office, essentially. And I love a ruffled man who is grumpy and sassy. He's wearing braces. He's got some era-appropriate facial hair. And he's just refusing to go on holiday.
I love him.
His EA is having none of it and is like, would you like me to pack the big hammer? Which is with reference to like a comically sized gavel that's on his desk. We cut to the Oval Office where Jed is being also very grumpy and sassy. Leo's like, we need to go and talk to Babbish. Jed's like, I don't want to talk to him. I don't want to do it. I'm really busy. And we get that actually Babbish is the fifth of the White House counsels to serve during Jed's administration.
Yeah, which I can see how as White House counsel you would kind of be like a little bit like, you're not letting me do anything here.
Yeah, let alone if you're serving at the pleasure of Jed Bartlet.
Yeah.
Then there's a kind of very fun back and forth about Jed being kind of grumpy because he's like, well, I guess you understand him, Leo, because, you've got this Chicago thing. And Leo's like, we are both men of Chicago.
Why did I have Boston in my head?
I also thought I had Boston, but I think
maybe just because he talks about Irish being all the time, I just was like,
you assume Boston.
Boston. Yeah, no.
Mm-hmm.
Jed then kind of goes like, why are people from Chicago so obsessed with being from Chicago? And I was like, I was just absolutely screaming at the like preemptive shade on Obama.
Yeah.
Regarding people from Chicago being obsessed with Chicago.
And the thing that I love is that he's like, what is it with people from Chicago being obsessed with Chicago, and why do I never meet them in Chicago? Like,
which is so true.
Why are they everywhere but Chicago? It's a very American thing, in my opinion, to be like constantly talking about where you're from. And I was like, I think in like the UK we're much more self-deprecating. The thing is like in the UK we love where we're from, but in order to show that love, we shit on it from a great height.
Yeah.
So like it will be like, I can talk shit about where I'm from. I can say it's the worst place in the world, but you dare, if you're not from it, hate on it. That is my right.
Yeah, I think Ireland is kind of similar. The only exception is Cork. People from Cork are so obsessed with Cork. They're just like, Cork is the center of all goodness in this world. To be fair, Cork is the rebel county, but that is kind of an outlier, I would say, in Irish society of like, truly people from Cork are obsessed with Cork, but no one else really gets away with it.
Yeah, definitely. I love Jed's kind of like grumpiness around going to go and see Babbish, is that he, I think, is worried about being like not the cleverest person in the room, which cues him saying, should I run back and get my Nobel Prize?
Ridiculous, outrageous.
And Leo being like, I think he knows you've got one.
Truly, at this point, I was like, they are the two grumps from the Muppets.
Yeah, truly.
Also, Bartlet just like really has that energy in this whole exchange of like the boomer dad being dragged to the doctor by his wife.
Yes. So apt. That is so it, nail on the head. Like Leo being like, I really think we should make an appointment.
Yeah.
No, it'll be fine. It'll just go away on its own.
And then, I'm sorry, but Bartlet is just absolutely on fire in this episode because he gets into the office and says, well, Oliver, what it really boils down to is this. I'm going to tell you a story, and then I need you to tell me whether or not I've engaged 16 people in a massive criminal conspiracy to defraud the public in order to win a presidential election.
Cueing, I think, the sharpest piece of physical comedy in this show to date.
The best visual gag, for sure.
So when Oliver has been previously kind of like faffing around, getting ready for this trip, he talks about needing a dictaphone to take with him because his dictaphone is broken. It's stuck on record on his desk. So Jed comes in, like a bat out of hell into his office and says that quote, cueing Oliver to pick up his comically large gavel and smash this dictaphone to dust. And then just calmly turn back and look at the president and go, okay.
And there's also just like an incredible preemptive joke about like no one in the White House ever got in trouble with like a off the rails recording device.
Yeah, it's just chef's kiss. No notes. Best cold open to date, I think. Wow, Leigh, Josh is actually doing some work this week.
It's been a while.
Yeah, he's like behind his desk. He's shuffling papers. That's kind of as far as he runs a meeting later, but that's kind of as far as we're going with his workload. And I love that we are opening the episode once again, post-credits, with a classic Donna and Josh explainer.
Yeah, about the economy of Mexico crashing.
Yeah, and Donna being floored by that. And Josh kind of just trying to have to explain like global economics to her.
Because she's floored that the US is going to bail Mexico out, basically.
And I feel like after the flowers incident of last week, it feels like we've gone into a very like normal Josh and Donna energy. And I guess once again, we're just not going to talk about it.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about it after if you were in an accident, I wouldn't stop for red lights.
Insane. Like, I'm furious. So I'll move on to Toby. Funnily enough, Leigh being in a terrible mood.
But to a much more extreme degree than usual, just walking into work immediately shouting about everything.
So there's been a leak of a quote about the sort of school vouchers situation that's going on that the president's behind at the moment. But I think, this is a really, really fun way for us to represent how Toby hates secrets.
Yeah.
And he is just like, I'm sitting on the secret and I'm really angry about it. And I will take that out on everyone around me.
I just want to be able to talk to my gal pal CJ and I'm not allowed.
Honestly.
That was a really horrifying voice. I'm so sorry to everybody involved.
CJ is back on our screens.
Thank God.
Yeah, thank the Lord, honestly. She's giving a press conference and she's the one that's kind of charged with dealing with the leaked comment about school vouchers. I was like, oh, school vouchers. We know this is like Mallory's like pet like topic that she loves and is very passionate about. Like, are we going to see Mallory? No, we won't. Also, another plot point this week is there's a very big, very, very, very big oil spill from an oil tanker outside Delaware. And this is causing great distress to Sam Seaborn. Leigh described Sam in our shared document as the resident eco-warrior, which I really enjoy. He's just kind of cool like that. Just really cares about the environment. What I will say is the reveal about why Sam is so distressed is fucking genius. Really, really enjoyable. And kind of ties in actually with the kind of link back to what we saw in flashbacks with Donna and Josh.
Yeah.
So Sam is kind of like walking around in distress, asking people for things that they would have no reason to know before him as deputy head of communications. Those two people, unfortunately, are Bonnie and Ginger, who are just like, I don't know, like, Sam, I don't know. I'm watching the TV with you. How would I know more?
I love that, like, in the last episode, I feel like we really focused down to, like, a very small group. And then this week, we're, like, opening it back up to the wider West Wing. It's very fun.
Yeah. Bonnie in a lovely, what I would say, like a periwinkle blue, like, top and cardigan. And Ginger just rocking a lovely natural wave in her hair.
Love to see it.
Love to see some natural
lovely
texture.
blow dry.
Yeah.
She's also in, like, a grey suit with, like, a kind of devilish shoulder pad, if you will. Loved it.
Toby is kind of directing a lot of his anger at CJ.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say he's still reeling from last week.
Yes. And I feel like CJ is a safe harbor for him to be a prick to.
Yeah, because I think she is the only other member of senior staff that he kind of sees as his equal.
And because they have such a long-standing relationship, like they've known each other for a really long time, I feel like he can get away with being an asshole to her because he knows that at some point they'll have a whiskey in his office and she'll be like, you know, you were a real prick to me that week.
Yeah.
And he'll be like, I'm really sorry, I was out of line. And like they can move past it. Back to Babbish. We've got Jed into his office. Jed and Leo sat down. Oliver is holding court. This dude has an impeccable vibe. And I what I really enjoy is like Jed starts like explaining what's been happening and Oliver stops him and he's just like, you and I don't enjoy attorney-client privilege. We love a man who's like, I don't intend to lie under oath. We love that.
Love to see it.
We really enjoy someone being like, God, I would never commit perjury.
I would go so far as to say I would love it to be the norm. I would love it to be the norm as like just a baseline standard that we're like not committing perjury.
Yeah, for sure. And that people who, you know, it may be kind of accepted that there are a lot of people out there in politics who talk about, you know, the importance of like loyalty and honesty and the power of the Bible. And yet some might say possibly some of those people are putting their hands on Bibles and maybe one could think or assume or maybe wonder if they are in fact lying.
And what I do find to be fascinating is that currently a lot of those people who are kind of putting their hands on Bibles and committing perjury are in fact some of the people that go so far out of their way to espouse, quote, Christian values. I do find that kind of fascinating.
Isn't it, Leigh, just so interesting? But yet again, in the year of our Lord 2025, we can't think too much on this. Otherwise you or I will lose our minds.
Yeah, correct.
Once again, a lovely quote from Oliver when Leo like kind of leans across Bartlet and is like, he never lied. Oliver just leans back in his chair and goes, I'd like to hear the president say that. Are you kidding? Honestly.
It's very the therapist from that episode with Josh of like, I don't need to like grandstand and bluster in order to be powerful in this room.
Yeah. We also in this scene get our final head count like from last episode, which is the list of people who know is officially Abby, Ellie, Elizabeth, and Zoe.
So you were right. The Bartlet kids knew.
Yeah. The 6 doctors that were involved in like his original diagnoses. His brother, who we only know of steamer trunk trauma. Fitzy.
So glad Fitzy knows. Would love to see Fitzy sometime.
Also loved that in that moment, Leo called him Fitz. Which means that we were right to assume that would be his nickname. Hoynes, Leo, the anesthesiologist, and Toby.
Yeah.
And of course, Bartlett himself. Famously the 17th man. What I do need, Leigh, is for Jed to have a better attitude about this whole thing.
Yeah, it's like people are not putting this upon you. You very much brought this upon yourself.
Like, Babbish is like, okay, I feel like we're really getting into this. Like, do you have some time to like work on this together? Because I feel like there's a lot of work for us to do. And Jed's like, well, like, you know, the Mexican economy is crashing. There's been this like huge oil spill. Like this has happened. But yeah, I can hang out with you and answer insulting questions for a while, is what he says.
Hun, this lawyer is like the best lawyer in the country, arguably.
This is your lawyer. You gave him this job.
It's literally his job to try and get a handle on the scope of what you've brought to his desk.
Yeah. There's some pettiness this week for sure. Speaking of fury, let's discuss Toby's fury.
Like, Toby has just started his day by shouting. He's continuing his day by shouting. And he is now to be heard shouting from another room throughout Josh's meeting.
Yeah.
And we kind of get Josh speaking, but kind of his eyes are on just a shouting Toby, being like, what's going on there?
This scene was a little bit crazy for me because so Josh is kind of running a meeting which is discussing like the securing of the loan for Mexico to help them bolster their economy. And they're in, I think it's the Roosevelt room, and they're like the room is full. The whole of the table is like packed with people. And Josh is like quite understandably like worryingly looking out of the window of the room like at Toby and not really listening to what's happening. And kind of rounds off that meeting by being like, guys, just like find the money. And there's a couple of people who are like it's quite complicated. Like, are you aware of how long this is going to take? And Josh is like, yeah, just like get it done.
Just make it happen.
Just make it happen. Which is my least favorite attitude in a professional environment, which leads us to the bonkers quote from Josh Lyman, which in the light of, as I said, Year of Our Lord 2025, feels uncomfortable. Would you like to?
The number of people whose permission I need before I can do whatever the hell I want, let me tell you, there's really a lot to be said for fascism. Josh, please.
It's not comfy. It's not comfy, Leigh. I don't feel comfy.
No, and I feel like this was like a fun jape when the threat of fascism itself was not real.
Was like a purely historical situation, you know? Ever present today. Ever present. Let's move on to something more positive. A absolutely classic West Wing tete-a-tete walking down the hall scene between CJ and Josh. Gorgeous.
And it is also, I was having like a worrying Trumpy feeling about CJ being tasked with like identifying the leak. But I think given CJ's attitude towards it and how she kind of like puts it to Josh, I feel less dodgy. I feel more like this is like fun. Like it's like a fun side plot rather than like, let's get out the disloyal, you know?
Yeah. And actually, as the episode goes on, there's a kind of really nice energy around CJ doing this job because what she keeps voicing to Toby and Josh is, look, like, this is our job. Leaks happen. We need to just deal with them when they happen. Like, I'm not sure how preemptive we can be about situations like this. People are always going to talk to the press or say something that they didn't mean. So yeah, it feels less witch hunty and more like this is a really shit day to have to just like ask people who I respect if they fucked up.
Yeah.
What I will say is I appreciate two things from CJ in this like two-hander with Josh. One of them is describing Toby as blasting around the halls. Sensational. And the other one is her sign off to Josh as he like wanders off, which is, "Thank you for your fortune cookie wisdom."
Thank you, Mr. Sorkin. I will be taking that and using it in my own life. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that take home. Yeah.
Josh goes back into his office. Donna is there loitering. She wishes to know more about the Mexican economy. And Josh does this like really fun thing where he's like, "Oh, you want to understand? You want me to tell you about it? You want me to teach you how that works?" And she's like, yeah, absolutely. And he just says, "Close the door." And Donna goes and closes the door and just turns back and looks at him so earnestly. And there's this amazing comic beat that lasts like for the perfect amount of time before she, like, the penny drops for Donna and she's like, "Oh, with me on the other side." Such a simple joke, but so effective.
So effective, yeah, for sure.
Would you like some good news, Leigh?
Oh my God, Charlie is going to college and I'm so happy and so excited and I'm so happy and I'm so proud of him.
I know. So Charlie is at his desk, like going through all of the like mountain of forms he's got to fill in. So he's applying to college, it seems, from this interaction that he has with Josh to do like some night classes.
Yeah.
And Josh is like, "Oh, what credits are you carrying forward?" And Charlie lists off this like, I don't really understand the American school system, but it sounds like a pretty impressive amount of like...
Yeah, so what they're talking is, so there's this thing called advanced placement in American high school, or AP. And basically, if you do AP classes in high school, they're considered to be like college level classes. And so if you have AP classes, they bring forward, they give you a certain number of college credits.
Oh.
And so unlike, you know, what we did in English university, which is basically where like you have to follow quite a set curriculum. In the States, in order to graduate, it's all about like having credits in certain subjects and then having the right number of total credits.
Okay.
So basically what this means is because of the number of like, and the list of AP classes that Charlie did is so impressive. It basically means that he, purely on the basis of the AP classes he did in high school, is going to be able to join a university for the first time as like a junior. So he's joining as like a third year. He's basically skipping first and second year of university because he did so many advanced placement classes in high school.
Because you guys have different names for years, right? Is sophomore your first year?
So you go freshman, sophomore, junior, senior.
Sure.
So he's basically been able to skip half of college.
Which leads us to Josh Lyman saying, "Charlie, just how smart are you?"
And then Charlie replies, "I've got some game." But he means like intellectually, and it's so cute.
I love him so much.
I want to see an episode of like University Challenge where Charlie is a contestant.
I feel like if we see Charlie's graduation day from university, I will sob.
I will weep. It'll be as bad as that time we watched A Dog's Purpose and I got dangerously dehydrated.
We both were almost unwell during the viewing of that film.
Howling.
At one point during A Dog's Purpose, Leigh and I had to pause the film and we both sat unable to look at each other in shaking sobs. Like audible, when you're just sort of like making noise.
I can never watch that film again.
No, I feel...
God damn you, Dennis Quaid. God damn you.
Damn you. How dare you? Leigh, would you like another new character?
Lieutenant Emily.
My God. Okay. So,
Hey.
So in his worries about the boats, Sam has asked a lieutenant, I assume like a naval lieutenant?
Yeah, it looks like it, doesn't it?
To come and talk to him about like the situation and give him some more information. And that person so happens to be Lieutenant Emily.
And she just so happens to be incredibly hot.
She's in dress uniform, which first of all is just phenomenal. And then they say these two things. Leigh, this is flirtatious as hell, right?
We've not really seen Sam have this level of game.
What he says to her, I think, is unbelievably respectful and, to use a buzzword of you from last week, sexy.
It's very like Leo and the Russian ambassador.
Truly. Would you like to be Sam or Emily?
I'll be Emily.
You look exactly how you sounded on the phone.
You look exactly how you look on the news.
I'm sorry, but what a fit exchange.
It's so hot because it's like, I see you. I've been aware of you.
Yeah.
Prior to us making contact, I've known who you are. I've been aware of your presence in this world.
But saying to someone, you look like how you sound on the phone, I don't know why. That's outrageous.
I mean, I would be a little bit concerned if I looked like how I sounded on the phone because I'm well aware that I have like a slightly ridiculous voice.
Another absolute cracker from Sam in this scene is him saying, I'm less visually observant than others, but I make up for it with cunning and guile.
Yeah. Okay. So I've absolutely loved having a scene with Emily where Sam has simply allowed a smart and capable woman who happens to be incredibly hot explain something to him, and he just simply listens and respects her professional knowledge and judgment. I think that's what we call growth.
What's lovely is it feels like this is an absolute reversal in the best kind of way of the scene that he had with CJ in series 1 about the census.
Yeah.
Where she was like, I don't know anything about this. I need you to tell me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Sam's like, Emily, I don't know anything about this. You're going to need to tell me. And I feel like Sam Seaborn's character has come on leaps and bounds in this show.
Mm-hmm.
They've allowed him, like, I think they've actually fleshed him out by now.
And you know who's helped him achieve that growth? CJ Craig.
Yeah.
His purely platonic friendship with CJ Craig.
With a powerful and intelligent woman. Yeah.
Is what has allowed him to have this incredibly hot exchange with Lieutenant Emily.
Yeah. I'm going to touch base with Oliver Babbish, just to say that I adore him.
I feel incredibly good about Oliver Babbish. I feel like we are in the right hands legally with Oliver Babbish.
So like, it seems like at this point in the play, it seems at this point in the episode that Oliver's like, right, the move here is that we need to find any sort of paper trail. So if there's anything at any point, like any sort of document that Jed has signed where he hasn't disclosed like any sort of health issue.
Where he has been asked about his health and he has denied having any existing health issues. Which
I feel like is a really smart way to play it. It's like, check all the skeletons in the closets first, then make a game plan. But to CJ's day from hell.
Oh, it's giving me block of cheese day joy. I'm thrilled.
It's the energy is quite silly, which is good, because when she asks Carol how many meetings she has that day, Carol says 1,138.
Mental.
Which is too many. Why is it that she always gets saddled with these jobs while the spin boys are off being silly?
Yeah, I feel like Josh never gets an annoying job. He just kind of floats about and does what he wants.
Yeah.
Or he gets to like ride in on the white horse on his like high horse and save the day and be like self-righteous.
CJ, I worked it out. My conjecture to you, Leigh, is Donna a libertarian?
I think she is. I think she won't be. She's going to find her democratic identity and her liberal values in like ages 40 to 45.
Yes.
But she does remind me of several kind of hyper intelligent girls who I went to high school with who were like, I'm going to research every possible political view I could have, and I'm going to decide on like my identity as a politically engaged person. And they came up with libertarian based off of no basis about what that actually means in practice.
I would like to say that I think it works for Donna because it does feel like she wants minimal intervention from government. It seems like every time she comes up with like a Donna Josh explainer, it's always like, why are you getting involved? Like, why is the government getting involved? Not to make Donna a hypocrite, but she then says that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, which I think is rich considering she keeps thinking Josh will change. And up to this point, he has not.
Yeah, that is correct. But then, unfortunately, Josh loses any ground that he may have been standing on by making a BDSM joke to his assistant. Now that is crazy town. That is crazy town.
I did enjoy that her response to that was just to look confused at him and say, go away from me.
Yeah.
But a little bit more Ainsley Hayes for you, Leigh?
Back-to-back Ainsley episodes. I am thrilled. Now, obviously, we disagree on the ERA, but I love her still.
Yeah, because it's okay to have political differing opinions and still get along in the true kind of like heart of bipartisanship. We should just be able to get along and respect each other's opinions.
And I love that we're continuing the thread of her being an appreciator and a lover of music, because we just find her vibing in her office, listening to some classical music.
Obviously, who's come knocking on her door but Sam Seaborn?
He can't stay away.
He can't stay away. And would you like to be Sam or Ainsley?
I'll be Sam.
Okay.
You did some decorating.
I did.
A woman's touch.
It was a guy named Kirk.
I really want this to be a Gilmore Girls reference.
I mean, I think that's a push, Leigh.
In my mind, Kirk from Gilmore Girls came in and decorated her office.
Famously not an interior decorator in that show.
What job didn't he have?
This is so true. Truly a Renaissance man.
Yeah.
I also like that ERA on one side, she's like, don't assume that a woman did this.
Yeah,
appreciate
absolutely.
that from her.
But then this is when we get the incredible reveal.
The incredible reveal that the flashback of Sam when he was working for Gage Whitney, his kind of horrible corporate job, was that he brokered the deal for the ship that has run aground in Delaware and made this huge oil spill. And he's like, Ainsley, I want your professional opinion, because what I want to do is I want to go on the record, basically. I want to make a deposition, which is, you know, I helped them broker this deal. I was really behind it. And then, you know, Josh came and saw me in the rain and took me to go and see Jed Bartlet speak. And then when I came back, I told them that there was a problem with the steering, there was a problem with the navigation, and that it was a bad deal. And if they spent $11 million more, they could have a safer ship. And I want to go on the record and say that. And Ainsley's like, don't like, stop talking. Like, because you're now embroiling me in this. And also, like, you have, though you stop working for them, your, like, attorney-client privilege is still kind of bound.
Yeah.
So you can't tell me those things. We love her being good at her job. But it's really interesting, isn't it, that, like, although there was a long time that Sam was, like, working for the man, actually, he, like, deep down, he's like, I feel like I did do the right thing. And I want it to be known that, like, now this company's going to have to pay out like $500 million or more. But with $11 million, they could have stopped this from happening.
But also, he knows that he didn't do the right thing. And that's why he's so riled up, because he wrote the clause into the contract that said that he wrote like them an airtight non-liability clause, which means that they get away with this.
Yeah. And I think he's just like, he's just a sad little warrior.
Yeah.
Because he's like, I helped make the machine that we can't beat.
If you think about it, it's kind of like that film that also came out when Barbie came out.
Oppenheimer.
There we go. Thank you.
Leigh and I were too emotionally engaged with Barbie to go and watch Oppenheimer. Which I know legit will be a really good film, but is it a Christopher Nolan one?
Yeah, I have a moral stance about Christopher Nolan.
I just don't think he can write good women.
I think he makes films for men to mansplain to their girlfriends, is what I think. And I think he's taken all of the joy and camp out of cinema. And I refuse to engage with him. And I take that as a political stance.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
I realize that might have been a tough moment for my relationship with some of our male listeners. Love you guys. It's not a personal slight or attack. I simply have to stand by my own values. I will say Inception is the exception. I loved Inception. From there, we lost the plot.
There was a time, dear listeners, where Leigh and I were like legally bound to remain indoors. And we were living with a person who was a man who did indeed explain many Christopher Nolan films to us. And I feel like that was it's just a road that now trodden Leigh can never come back from.
Yeah.
You okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. Let's move on.
Let's move on. I can't believe that our little Charlie's going to college, Leigh.
I love how like everyone is super down in the dumps this ep, and I just really needed this moment of respite from Mrs. Landingham and Charlie, just like chatting about what Charlie might major in.
Just bustling about the office.
It's
been a minute since we've seen just like people just like kind of going about their work, and like, you know, Mrs. Landingham's doing some things on her desk, and then like Margaret comes in and is like filing some stuff.
And also, is this the first time we've seen Mrs. Landingham in a trouser? She's wearing a little trouser suit. She's wearing a little cigarette trouser.
Yeah.
She looks amazing.
Yeah.
And I do feel from Mrs. Landingham that wearing trousers is a feminist stance.
Certainly, especially in the workplace.
Within feet of the Oval Office, Fiona.
Indeed, indeed. I love that there's like a lot of like, what are you going to major in?
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to join any like societies? And then Mrs. Landingham being like, of course you'll join Glee Club.
Love Mrs. Landingham being a Glee fan before Glee was ever a thing.
First of all, for me, that means that like Mrs. Landingham went to college.
Oh, I believe it. You know what? I think she may join Ainsley Hayes and Charlotte York as a Smith alum. I wouldn't be shocked.
And I would love for her to have been part of the Smith Glee Club.
I would love that. Or maybe that's how her and her husband met.
Please.
Oh, wait, no, because she wouldn't have been in a co-ed college. It wouldn't work.
No.
She would have been in a single-sex college, I think.
Yeah.
At the time. She would have been at college.
I enjoy Margaret joining in and being like, how about fencing? And Charlie being like, sorry? And her going, fencing is good because you can learn the philosophy of self-defense, which I deem to be a very funny phrase.
Yeah.
Also, it means to me that Margaret has done fencing.
Yeah.
Which brings me a lot of joy.
I really see that for her, yeah.
Yeah. Charlie is explaining to them how there's so many forms to fill out.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, this is a form on this thing, this is a form on this thing. And it's like this huge pile.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's like, and then there's this 14-page form on, and he stops. And you see him having this huge moment of like realization.
Mm-hmm.
And then he looks really scared. And then he's like, Margaret, I need to speak to Leo. And she's like, oh, he's in a meeting with Oliver Babbish. And he's like, no, I really need to see him. Tell him it's an old friend from home. I love when we use code phrases.
But also, you can tell that Margaret and Mrs. Landingham like know what the code means, but don't know what it's with reference to. And so they're like, Charlie, are you sure? But it's so fit. And I love from Charlie that he's like, I need to keep this locked down.
Yeah.
Even my greatest allies, Margaret and Mrs. Landingham, cannot know what I have just realized.
Yeah. And I also feel like Margaret and Mrs. Landingham, as much as the gals are like up for a laugh, are both like, respectfully, I would never ask you.
Received, understood.
Yeah. It's the code of the executive assistant. We'll go back to Babbish, to the meeting that Leo's in.
I absolutely love and respect and adore Oliver Babbish referring to the president as a lil pissy.
It's very respectful because I would say I would use different language to describe Jed's behavior. I think that Oliver says something incredibly insightful in this because Leo's defending Jed up to the hilt, which is, you know, understandable. As is one of his best friends. And
they're boys. They're boys.
They're boys. But what Babbish says is, that's my problem, Leo. Are you out of your mind? He did everything right. He did everything you do if your intent is to perpetrate a fraud.
Yeah.
And I mean, he's not wrong.
Yeah.
Like, I really respect Babbish saying, like, no one is squeaky clean.
No.
Like, no one is faultless, not even Josiah Bartlet. There's got to be something he's missed somewhere. Otherwise, it's fishy as hell.
Yeah. What has Charlie seen?
It's really bad. Once again, Charlie cracking the case.
I'm a mystery solver.
I'm a mystery solver. Famously, in his own words.
A regular Nancy Drew, not unlike Toby Ziegler.
What we think has happened is, because he's seen this form he's got to fill in for college, which is a 14-page like family health form. He's like, oh, when Zoe and Ellie went to college, which would have been after Jed's diagnosis, both of them would have had to fill in forms like these, which means that it could have been fraudulently filled in, omitting Jed's MS diagnosis.
But the kicker is, Zoe was 17 when she went to college, so her form would have required a parental signature.
Meaning that potentially Jed has signed it himself.
Yeah.
Which would be a real kicker. This also means that Charlie is in fact our 18th man, because he knows that Jed's sick, because why else would he raise this? The thing that I think is amazing about this and makes me realize that Charlie is crazy smart is that he doesn't know that Jed and Leo are currently working with Babbish on this thing. He doesn't know that they're talking about what to do about Jed's MS diagnosis.
Although what is interesting is we did see him kind of like coming in and out of the Oval Office last week when Toby was in there screaming.
Yeah. So the kid's a genius. And he's worked out that he's like, I just feel like Charlie's loyalty for Bartlet is really moving.
In the words of George Michael, I will be your father figure. Put your tiny hand in mine. Obviously without the gay sex connotation that George Michael intended it with.
But no, it is, and we'll get to the moment at the end of the episode that kind of really hits that home, which made me cry. But I think, first of all, Leigh, we should go to Donna's interview with CJ.
Oh, my Lord Jesus, as if I thought I couldn't love Donna more.
This is so funny.
She really got me.
Yeah, me too. Would you like to be Donna or CJ?
I will be CJ. I will give you Donna.
Thank you. CJ, I can't lie like this anymore.
Are you saying it was you?
I feel horrible. I should have said something before, but I was afraid of what you'd...
No, it's okay.
No, let me get this off my chest. It was me. I called Terry Cashin.
Why?
I don't know. Why does anyone do anything?
What are you talking about?
I'm a madwoman, CJ, and it doesn't stop with the leak.
What do you mean?
Call the authorities. Send them to my parents' house in Madison.
Why?
They'll find the Lindenberg baby in the basement.
Okay.
Also some Post-its reminding me where I put Jimmy Hoffa.
Get out.
I framed Roger Rabbit.
Get out.
No notes for Donna there. Truly a worthy use of her time coming up with that whole bit. And I think probably like a moment of lightness for CJ that she did in fact need, however much it was frustrating.
Yeah, also you can just see CJ's like heart drop into her stomach being like, Donna, no, don't let it be you. But I also love that she like pulls that prank and then is immediately like, can I get you a salad?
Yeah, and CJ's like, yeah, from the place we like.
Yeah. Then we get back into a Josh and Donna walk and talk, and I do need us to take a moment for the fact that Josh has contributed a significant portion of his day towards thinking of a creative way to convince Donna out of her isolationist stance by reading her an 8th grade social studies textbook in order to fully explain it. Where has he sourced the textbook? How long did he find searching for the right passage when he should have been doing, I don't know, his job? But I will say, to be fair, I think 8th grade was my favorite year of history.
Yeah. I mean, the whole bit is very cute. Is it the work of the deputy chief of staff? Probably not. Probably not. I really want CJ to find the leak, but I am enjoying the sort of tomfoolery that is born from the insane list of interviews that she has to do. The other interview that we see her doing is with a very fun man.
I love the Lizzie Proctor man. I want to know his story and everything about him.
She's talking to this guy and he's like, yeah, no, totally. CJ, like, really tough day for you. Like, I understand, like, this job's kind of like really frustrating at points. And she's like, I just don't know, like, how to find out who the leak was. And just absolutely deadpan, he goes, well, if you dunk the suspect in a deep well of water and they drown, it means that they're not a witch. And she's like, all right, that's it. And then he just screams, I saw Lizzie Proctor speaking with the devil. And I have to say, I am obsessed with any Arthur Miller reference being used in the White House.
Love it always.
A full circle moment.
Especially if it's the Crucible. I think we should bring the Crucible in more.
Like, truly him being like this weird, like, McCarthy-esque witch hunt that you are on, CJ, finding this leak. I will quote the play written about the experience of the writer.
Fun fact, dear listener, I did in fact play Mary Warren in our university's production of The Crucible.
A lovely turn from you, Leigh.
Thank you.
A lovely turn. Actually, a very fun production, I would say, of that play.
Yeah, it was very fun. Yeah.
Toby's not okay.
Toby is so deeply not okay.
He's like really sad in his office. And CJ comes in and she's like, it's me, I'm Spartacus, which I enjoy because she's like, okay, someone leaked it. I'm just going to say it's me because then it can be over. She knows something's up.
And then we come to understand why Toby wants to know who the leaker is so badly, although CJ doesn't come to understand it. Toby is just like, oh, like, we need to know who the leaker is so that, like, when the big thing hits, when we get the big problem, we know the lay of the land.
which is a really, really like valuable conversation for him and CJ to have. But the thing that cracked me up watching this scene is he kept referring to them as potatoes. So he's like, which isn't funny, but just at the time I thought it was funny. So he's like, we got to put more effort into the small potatoes because when the big potatoes come, and you're like, why is this the analogy why is potatoes what we've landed on, Toby?
He's not well. He's not okay. He's grasping at straws.
He's not himself. He's not
himself. But then what devastated me was she kind of goes like, well, what's coming? What's the thing? And he's like, oh, it's nothing. Like, don't worry about it. And she just says, Toby, why are you lying to me? And she says it with her full chest.
Yeah.
It's on a par with Abby Bartlett saying, don't talk to me like I'm other people. It's the same energy.
Very that energy. And I really love when we have moments like this because it really grounds you in those characters' backstory and their like existing relationship before we met them in this show.
As an incredibly trivial side note, is this, in Toby's office, the first spot of a relatively modern-looking MacBook on Toby's desk?
Yeah, laptop on the desk. Honestly, it looked pretty much like the one that I very recently recycled.
Yeah.
Love that Toby's an Apple girly.
He's an Apple girly. He's Swish. He's got his system. He's ready to go.
Yeah. Also, another trivial thing about this scene is that CJ's wearing like a grey trouser suit that is a complete wow for me. She looks amazing.
Yeah, she does look amazing, yeah.
Leigh, let us prepare for Charlie Young to once again break our hearts.
I love that Zoe wanted Charlie to look out for her dad.
And that he kept her secret. So Charlie's sort of sat on a bench out on the colonnade, like looking very sad. And Jed comes over and is like, well, how did you know? And he was like, oh, well, Zoe told me to like what to look out for so I could tell the First Lady.
It does also kind of feel like the president's body man is someone who should know. It would be kind of crazy for Charlie not to know, I think. Because Roosevelt's body man was one of the only people who knew about his disability.
Yeah. And this leads us to one of the most devastating passages from Jed Bartlet to Charlie. Jed sits down next to him on the bench and he says, we won't discuss this anymore. It'll be public soon enough, and the more conversations you have with me, the more lawyers you're going to have to talk to, and they bill an hour what you take home in a week. So we won't discuss it except to say this. You're going to be subpoenaed. I'm confident in your loyalty to me. I'm confident in your love for me. If you lie to protect me, if you lie just once, if you lie just a little, if you lie because you can't stand what's happening to me and the people making it happen, if you ever lie, you're finished with me. You understand?
And Dulé Hill's little face, he's just so sad. And it
His little face
has big vibes of like, not to bring She Who Shall Not Be Named into it, but it has big vibes of like the Harry Potter Dumbledore moment where Dumbledore is like, before they go and find the locket, where Dumbledore is like, if I tell you to run, run. Do you understand? If I tell you to leave me and save yourself.
Yeah. Honest, that's one of the funniest things you've ever. I loved it. It moved me. And just Dulé Hill's face with his eyes full of tears, like looking up at Martin Sheen and just going, yes, sir.
Dulé Hill does such an incredible, like, eyes welling.
Yes, never
but
overspilling.
No tears falling.
Never overspilling. It's something that I love in an actor.
Because it makes sense for the character of Charlie to be quite held as a person. So it's just so character correct. And he does it so well.
And Leigh, we're going to close out this ep in the Oval with Jed and Babbish. Jed lets Babbish know that there was this document. And it turns out that, because Leo did some sleuthing, it turns out that it was signed and that the MS was left off. But that it was signed by Abby Bartlett. So not terrible, but still bad. Like not as bad as if he had signed it himself. And then we get this amazing little scene, which kind of takes us to the end of the episode. And I would love us to perform it dramatically.
Yeah. Man, I feel like a man. Let's be men together, Fee.
Truly. Yeah. Would you like to be Bartlett or Oliver?
I love your Bartlett, so I will be Babbish.
Okay, excellent.
Good evening, Mr. President.
Well, I've got news for you, Oliver. Turns out I didn't do everything right after all. Zoe had to fill out a family history form for Georgetown, and Because she was 17, a parent had to sign it.
And she left off the MS?
Yeah.
And you signed it?
I'd give anything if I had. It was Lady Macbeth. There's a bad moon rising, Oliver. We both know it. They're gonna take me out for a walk. This isn't what you signed up for. Leo begged you to take this job. This isn't what you signed up for. If you leave, I'd appreciate it if you did it now, so it doesn't look like my lawyer bailed on me when the rain starts. No one's gonna hold it against you.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. President. If I stay, will you do exactly what I tell you to do?
I guess it depends.
No, I'm afraid it can't depend, sir.
What would be my first step?
First, tell your staff.
Yeah.
Then decide how to make a public announcement.
Yeah.
Then order the Attorney General to appoint a special prosecutor. Not just any special prosecutor, the most blood-spitting, Bartlet-hating Republican in the bar. He's going to have an unlimited budget and a staff like an army. The new slogan around here is going to be, bring it on. He's going to have access to every piece of paper you ever touched. If you invoke executive privilege one time, I'm gone. An assistant DA in Ducksworth wants to take your deposition, you're on the next plane. A freshman congressman wants your testimony, you'll sit in his kitchen. They want to drag you to the Hague and charge you with war crimes. What do we say?
Bring it on.
I'll be in my office for a while if you need me.
Outrageous. Honestly, this was like, I loved this episode up to this point, but I also understand why like there's buzz around this ep and people really love it because scenes like that are phenomenal.
It is go time. We are up to the 18th man with Charlie. I feel stressed that the numbers are growing. And it's just like, let's go for the rest of the season. I do love that we're invoking the title of a cheerleading movie franchise as our kind of slogan here.
Truly. I also have to say I'm screaming at Lady Macbeth.
Referring to your own wife as Lady Macbeth is pretty bold.
It's crazy. It's so funny.
I will say it would like this ending of the episode is the hardest it's ever been for me to not just like go ahead and watch the next step because I want to see CJ's reaction to the news. I want to see Sam's reaction. I want to see Donna's reaction. Like I want to know what Ainsley Hayes is going to have to say about this. Like I need to see it all.
I think we've got juicy episodes to come, Leigh. An amazing end to the series, I think.
I'm pumped for the end of the season.
Me too. Let us into the quick fires.
Best fashion fee?
I agree with what you've put.
Mrs. Landingham in her trouser suit.
Yeah, so cute.
With an honourable mention to Ginger in her grey suit with the devilish shoulder pads.
Yeah, and I will say also honourable mention to CJ's grey pantsuit.
Mm-hmm.
And just the overall styling of Oliver Babbish.
Yeah, he just kind of feels like the detective in like the noir movie.
Yes.
It feels as like what they're invoking with him, which I love.
And I really enjoy. What could a British or Irish politician never get away with?
I think I agree with what you've put. Make any sort of joke about a leak of information.
Yeah. Like the kind of like Crucible jokes, Donna's jokes wouldn't be happening, I do not think, if there had been a leak for our kind of political situation over here. How long until we kind of come up with any of our big ticket bingo card items, free speech, religion, guns, abortion, that kind of thing? I feel like we're dancing around impeachment as a concept, which, feels like a nice big beefy issue. And shout out to McCarthyism yet again.
We love a shout out to McCarthyism for sure.
Mm-hmm. And Leigh, what was your best writerly moment?
Well, Oliver, what it really boils down to is this. I'm going to tell you a story, and then I need you to tell me whether or not I've engaged 16 people in a massive criminal conspiracy to defraud the public in order to win a presidential election. Smashes dictaphone.
Okay. Yeah. That's gotta be the winner. Man, I feel like a man.
The number of people whose permission I need before I can do whatever the hell I want, let me tell you, there's really a lot to be said for fascism.
Yes, that I think wins. It's stressful. Honourable mention for me to, you look exactly how you sounded on the phone. And of course, Charlie, just how smart are you?
I've got some game.
Yeah. I would like to just put forward for Girl, I Feel Like a Girl, Margaret's insanity with fencing is good because you learn the philosophy of self-defense.
And I have to say, CJ Craig made me really proud to be an American this week.
Did she?
Toby, why are you lying to me?
Yeah.
So incisive.
Such a kicker. And there we leave the episode.
Yeah. Any predictions on the doors for the end of the season before we get into the study sesh?
So I think that we will follow both like internal feelings towards Bartlet's MS diagnosis, and then there'll be some like press-based stuff that we'll be navigating. I think we're going to have a big Hoynes moment where like we're going to actually thrash it out as him being like, but you promised me.
Yeah, it was me next.
It was my turn next. I think that would be a really juicy way to end the season.
I'm going to say I feel like we're going to hear from Anne Stark again.
Ooh, yeah.
Because of course we're going to have a Republican candidate also. I think we're going to end on a like, I serve at the pleasure of the president style moment where like we've all ended up a bit frayed because we all feel personally hurt and devastated that Jed has kept the secret from us. But then we'll have a moment of coming back together.
Of like, let's knuckle down.
Let's knuckle down. I'm hoping for a Zoe return by the end of the season. And obviously with Zoe comes Gina Toscano.
I think we might see Zoe because I think the information about her Georgetown application will naturally bring her into the narrative more.
I fear to say, my concern is, will this potential criminal conspiracy on behalf of Jed Bartlet, will this be the bridge too far for Ainsley serving in this administration?
Will
Ainsley be the one to walk away?
I think that because I think we need to lose someone this season.
Yeah.
Because I think it's like season by season we're picking up like recurring characters. But in the tradition created by Mandy, we had Mandy and she served her purpose, and then we replaced her with Joey Lucas. And it feels like we've replaced Joey Lucas with Ainsley Hayes. And, you know, women, there's only space for so many women on this show.
A listener did reach out to let us know that Mandy was supposed to return in the Seth Gillette episode to be like written out, but the scheduling apparently didn't work out.
Well, she was too busy on One Tree Hill.
Oh, what a time to be alive.
Phenomenal. I think it's time for us to learn something. What are we going to focus on this week in our study session?
I'll just bring us back for a moment to the line in Oliver Babbish's iconic monologue at the end of this episode, where he says, if you invoke executive privilege one time, I'm gone. Sophie, what even is executive privilege?
Please do tell.
Now, I did throw out to our listeners what they would like for the study session for this episode, because there's obviously like a couple of different directions to go in. So thank you everyone on Patreon and on Instagram who like sent me your requests. And thank you to Daniel for this particular request. And there were some other requests from lovely Tessa on our Discord, which were kind of like in the same region, talking about like what kind of attorney-client privilege does the White House counsel have, and you know, all of that kind of thing. So we're going to get into some of that under the umbrella of what is executive privilege. Time magazine summed it up as George Washington invoked it, Dwight Eisenhower named it, and Richard Nixon abused it.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's satisfying.
Now, Mark Rozelle is author of 2 books on executive privilege and the founding dean of the School of Policy and Government at George Mason University. So I'm going to go ahead and say a smart guy who knows his stuff.
Yeah.
He defined executive privilege as, quote, the right of the president and high-level executive branch officers, so that would be most of our main cast, to withhold information from Congress, the courts, and ultimately the public when it, A, comes under certain national security needs, or B, is protecting the privacy of White House deliberations when it is in the public interest to do so.
Ooh, okay.
Now, the term executive privilege isn't actually in the Constitution.
Right.
But it's considered to be implied through the system of checks and balances between the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch, and kind of the separation of powers between those three, basically to make sure, obviously, as we've mentioned before, that one branch doesn't become kind of all-powerful over the other two. And executive privilege is how the legislative branch's power over the executive is checked.
Okay. I think I'm following.
Yeah. So basically, what it's saying is the legislative branch, so the Senate and the House of Representatives, can't just subpoena whatever they want all the time ever.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Now, presidents and Congress have been fighting for the whole of US history about what is allowed to come under the scope of executive privilege. Mm-hmm. And it is about, obviously, a president needing to be able to get honest advice from his or her advisors without anybody being worried about how those ideas might be perceived by the public, or knowing that those conversations can happen in private. You can kind of spitball, brainstorm, come up with ideas, and ultimately what is said in those rooms isn't going to become public information. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. White House counsel Neil Eggleston, who worked in the Obama administration, said to Harvard Law Today, "You want advisors to feel free to explore a range of options, including options that might be unpopular, and have a free flow of conversation with the president in order to develop the best options. But executive privilege can also be used to hide illegal or improper behavior."
Okay, right. I'm getting to the nub of it now.
Yeah. So the term executive privilege was coined by President Eisenhower in the 50s. And let me tell you, Eisenhower loved it. He invoked it a lot.
All right. Okay.
But it goes all the way back to George Washington, who claimed it when Congress requested documents on the negotiation of the Jay Treaty with England. And George Washington argued, quote, "The nature of foreign negotiations requires caution, and their success must often depend on secrecy." Which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Also in 1792, Congress requested to examine documents relating to a failed military operation against Native American tribes. And the Secretary of State at the time, Thomas Jefferson, wrote that after kind of conferring with his cabinet, George Washington believed that, quote, "The executive ought to communicate such papers as the public good would permit and ought to refuse those, the disclosure of which would injure the public."
Yeah, so that seems like the sound theory behind it, the logic.
Yes. Yeah.
And then I guess there's also plenty of grey area.
Yeah, so it is a qualified, not an absolute power. So you can't just claim executive privilege over whatever you want. Mm-hmm. And that is ultimately what is decided by the judicial branch, by the courts.
Okay, cool.
So Raoul Berger, who wrote Executive Privilege, A Constitutional Myth, argues that basically because it's not in the Constitution, executive privilege doesn't actually exist.
Oh, interesting.
So there's a real debate about it. That brings us to kind of the first time that executive privilege really ended up being ruled on by any kind of court, which was in the case of the United States versus Aaron Burr.
Leigh, tell me all about it.
Fee is frankly obsessed with Aaron Burr based off of the musical Hamilton.
I would just like to caveat by saying that I'm obsessed with the actor who played Aaron Burr for the recorded Disney Plus version of Hamilton. Mm-hmm. And there was a time, some might say, where I was deeply affected by the song Wait For It. And would perform it often for Leigh. So I tell me about my boy.
So we're post the story of Hamilton at this point, but basically Aaron Burr has been rejected by his own party, the Democratic Republicans, because he opposed Thomas Jefferson in the election of 1800 presidential runoff. He's then being shunned by the Federalists, the other main party of the day, because he killed Alexander Hamilton in a duel.
Yeah, fair.
So I would say a low point of Aaron Burr's life. Kind of everyone hates him at this point.
Not a lot of friends. Not a lot of friends.
He decides to move west to seize lands belonging to Spain in Louisiana and Mexico with the idea of offering the Western states to join him in newly colonized lands. He basically tried to make his own country.
Yeah, that's wild.
Now, his longtime friend, General James Wilkinson, kind of abandoned this adventure the pair of them were having and sent a message to Thomas Jefferson that Burr wanted to entice the Western states out of the Union and join him with the support of England, Fee.
No.
Yeah.
Aaron.
Jefferson, who by this point is president, alerts Congress and orders Aaron Burr's arrest. Now, in his recent book, The Treason Trial of Aaron Burr, Law, Politics, and the Character Wars of the New Nation, Kent Neumeyer said, quote, January 22nd, 1807, Jefferson pronounced Burr guilty of treason to Congress and the entire nation without a grand jury indictment. Basically, Thomas Jefferson is like, this is an old grudge, and Thomas Jefferson is like popping off.
And he's like, I don't need anyone to say anything. I'm deciding, I'm in power, you're guilty.
Yeah.
Okay.
Quote, in Jefferson's morally dichotomous calculus, Burr was a danger to the Republic. In Jefferson's personalized view of the presidency, it was his responsibility to eliminate the danger, even if it meant breaking the law. Burr brought out the worst in Jefferson, and Jefferson brought out the worst in Burr.
Just two guys that can't get along. This town's
really
not big
is.
enough for the both of us.
Genuinely, it kind of has like a little bit of a Real Housewives fight energy to it.
Yeah, perfect. That's the best analogy.
Now, Chief Justice John Marshall, who was also Jefferson's longtime political foe, a theme developing here. He also happened to be Thomas Jefferson's distant cousin, presided over Burr's treason trial because he was the federal judge for the U.S. Circuit Court for Virginia at the time. Now, Marshall subpoenaed Jefferson for documents that Burr had requested for his defense.
Right.
And Jefferson argued that he didn't have to comply because he was the president.
Okay.
But then eventually did supply parts of the letters to the court that were requested, and Burr was eventually found not guilty.
Right. Okay.
So Jefferson is considered to be the first president to kind of establish the precedent of releasing only parts of subpoenaed material.
Right. And being like some but not all, like essentially like redacted before redacted was a thing.
Exactly. So he's quoted as saying, the president must be able to decide independently what papers coming to him as president the public interests permit to be communicated and to whom. Michael Dorff, who's a constitutional law expert for Cornell Law School, said, quote, Jefferson says that the court doesn't have any power to issue this, but I'm going to hand it over anyway because I'm a cooperative kind of guy. That set a pattern that I think we've seen ever since, that the president or members of the administration will cooperate to some degree, but say they're doing so voluntarily. Now, Chief Justice John Marshall did refer to the confidentiality privileges of the presidency again in another case that he presided over, Marbury versus Madison, but neither of these cases actually pushed him to definitively decide whether a presidential privilege existed, and if so, for whom.
Okay.
And in what form. Now, it wasn't really super relevant again until Richard Nixon.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So we basically haven't decided what executive privilege really is fully.
So it kind of stopped being relevant, and so everyone was like, that's a really complicated grey area. Let's kind of just like shuffle it to one side and put it in a drawer.
Because nobody really pushed executive privilege to see how far it could go. Until
Watergate?
That slippery little snake, Richard Nixon, and Watergate. So it's 1972. The year, incidentally, that the ERA passed the House and the Senate. For historical
just
context.
to think that these things are going on at the same time is kind of crazy, isn't it?
There's a lot going on. President Nixon is running for re-election. The U.S. is really in the depths of the Vietnam War. It's a divided country. The Nixon campaign is like, in order to get re-election, we are going to have to be aggressive. Be aggressive. Now, in May, burglars break into the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C. They are, in fact, connected to Nixon's re-election campaign because, of course, Richard Nixon is a Republican. They are caught wiretapping phones and stealing documents. Hence, the concern about the dictaphone in this episode. But we will also get onto that a bit more later. So, as it turns out, the Nixon campaign's aggressive tactics were actually illegal espionage. Just fully illegal.
Yeah.
The wiretap didn't work, so they came back on the 17th of June with a new mic, and a security guard noticed someone had taped over several of the locks in the door locks in the building and called the police, who caught the burglars, and the detectives found copies of the re-election committee's White House phone number in the burglars' personal belongings.
I mean, be smarter if you're going to be a spy.
Yeah. In August, Nixon gives a speech in which he swears that none of his staff were involved in the break-in, and because this was a simpler time, the public believed him. November, he's re-elected in a landslide victory. Now, Nixon decides that he's going to cover this up by giving hush money to the burglars.
Yeah, okay.
So Nixon and his aides instruct the CIA to impede the FBI's investigation of the crime, which this cover-up is more illegal than the break-in itself.
Yeah.
Because it's just a complete abuse of presidential power and absolutely obstruction of justice. 7 conspirators to burglary are indicted in charges related to the Watergate affair. At the urging of Nixon's team, 5 of them plead guilty to avoid trial. The other 2 are convicted in 1973. Now, a small but growing group, including 2 Washington Post reporters, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, the trial judge of the 2 who were convicted, John J. Sirica, and a couple of members of the Senate investigating committee, begin to suspect there is something more at play. At the same time, the conspirators start cracking under the pressure, and an anonymous whistleblower, Deep Throat, famously provides key info to Woodward and Bernstein at the Washington Post. Woodward and Bernstein reveal Nixon's role in the conspiracy.
When that news broke,
it must have been a crazy time to be alive. Which brings us to a man called John Dean, who was the Oliver Babbish of his day. He was the White House counsel. Now, he had no prior knowledge of the break-in or the White House's involvement, but over the next kind of couple of months, he was basically put in the role of desk officer to the cover-up.
Right.
So he's called to testify before Congress at the Watergate hearings by that investigative committee. He didn't totally realize that he was committing a crime until later, after Nixon had won the 1972 election.
Right.
He realizes that he's being implicated in an illegal cover-up. He doesn't do the right thing right away. At first, he starts kind of like shredding incriminating files.
Never a good start.
Never a great start, but also I do see the impulse. Like, that's going to freak you out as a lawyer. Like, that's the end of your career as a lawyer.
Yeah.
And then on March 21st, 1973, he famously went into the Oval Office and told President Nixon that there was, quote, a cancer on the presidency. And it would take them all down if they didn't stop it. Now, John Dean could tell that Nixon had absolutely no intention of coming clean, so he decides to do it himself. Before his testimony, April 15th, Nixon calls John Dean again into his office to make sure that Dean isn't going to implicate President Nixon in his testimony.
Right.
Some great kind of intimidation tactics.
Yeah.
And President Nixon basically did something weird in this meeting that got John Dean suspicious. So President Nixon says, you know, when I told you we could get $1 million to continue to pay the convicted burglars to remain silent, I was just kidding. Dean says he hadn't thought that, but he'd take the president's word. Nixon then stands up from his chair, walks to a corner of the office, and whispers, I was wrong to promise clemency for burglar E. Howard Hunt when I spoke with Chuck Colson, wasn't I? Dean replies, yes, Mr. President, that would be considered an obstruction of justice. John Dean is like, it's weird that he's moving to a different part of the room and whispering.
Yeah.
And he wonders if Nixon is secretly taping their conversation and doesn't want that part to be audible.
Okay.
So in June, John Dean testifies that the Watergate break-in had been approved by the former Attorney General John Mitchell with the knowledge of the chief White House advisors John Ehrlichman and H.R. Haldeman. He testified that President Nixon had been aware of the cover-up and had therefore knowingly obstructed justice. And he added his suspicion, quote, I didn't know if a tape exists, but if it does exist, I think this committee should have that tape because it would corroborate many of the things that this committee has asked me. Now, of course, we can directly quote what happened in John Dean's meeting with Richard Nixon, because Richard Nixon was in fact taping every meeting he had. Hence, Oliver Babbish's trauma around dictaphones.
Yeah, and the big hammer being used.
Now, James D. Robinault, who's a lawyer and author who actually lectures with John Dean about Watergate now, says, quote, "There are few times in American history when the entire country is focused on one television event. One of them was the Kennedy assassination, one of them was the moon landing, one of them was 9/11, and the other one is John Dean's testimony. It was that important and that significant." It was huge. Like, John Dean, as White House counsel, was one of the only senior staff members to actually testify against President Nixon and not perjure himself.
Yeah.
Robinault goes on to say, everybody kind of went through him. He did things like facilitate payment to the people who had been arrested to keep them quiet, which was an obstruction of justice because they were trying to keep witnesses from honestly and fully testifying before a grand jury about what happened. Now, because other high-level officials lied in their testimony, basically, if the tapes could be found, the tapes were one of the only ways that John Dean could actually corroborate his story about the president being involved. So a week later, luckily, Senate investigators happened to ask presidential aide Alexander Butterfield about if any such tapes existed. Now, famously, we know that from our Cassidy Hutchinson's episode way back in early season 1, Cassidy Hutchinson has really taken the mantle of Alexander Butterfield and has held him up as her inspiration for testifying in the January 6th trials. Because like her, Alexander Butterfield was like a low-level staffer who basically he responded by saying, "I'm sorry you asked, but yes, there was a taping system that taped all the president's conversations." Not only was Alexander Butterfield aware of the taping system, but he had actually helped install it.
Yeah.
So Nixon had microphones in the Oval Office, the Cabinet Room, his executive office building, the Aspen Lodge at Camp David, and also recorded phone calls in the Lincoln Sitting Room. And basically, the Supreme Court orders Nixon to hand over the tapes to Congress in the summer of 1974. Prosecutors found that they corroborated John Dean's testimony and implicated the president in the cover-up. Robinault says John Dean was the first and one of the only, actually, in the higher echelons to give honest testimony. People who testified, including the chief of staff and the attorney general, they all went to jail for lying about what was going on.
Whoa, okay.
Basically, John Dean made a deal that he would receive a reduced sentence for providing key witness testimony and pleading guilty to obstruction of justice. Mm-hmm. He served 4 months in prison and was disbarred from practicing law in DC and Virginia. So we can kind of see this is very much the tradition that Oliver Babbish is being written into, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
As the White House counsel being the one person who's I don't have blind loyalty to you.
Yeah, I'm not going to go to jail for you.
Totally. Now, Nixon didn't hand over the tapes right away. He struggled to protect the tapes all through the summer and autumn of 1973. And his lawyers argued executive privilege as a reason why he shouldn't have to hand them over.
Okay.
But Judge Sirica, the Senate committee, and the independent special prosecutor, Archibald Cox, were absolutely determined that he was going to hand them over. Cox refused to stop demanding the tapes. Nixon ordered that he be fired, leading to Justice Department officials to resign in protest. That set of events is what is known as the Saturday Night Massacre.
Yes. Okay.
That occurred over the issue of executive privilege. I feel with Watergate, there are so many named events and things that you've heard the name of, but you don't fully know the context.
Yeah.
Because it's obviously not something that happened within our lifetimes. Dear listeners, if this did happen within your lifetimes, we'd be so interested for your memories of this.
Yeah.
And much like Thomas Jefferson, Nixon agreed eventually to surrender some, but not all of the tapes. Because in July, the Supreme Court ordered Nixon to turn them over. So they ruled against him on the basis of executive privilege.
Right.
So in a unanimous Supreme Court ruling by Justice Warren E. Burger, it reads, "A president and those who assist him must be free to explore alternatives in the process of shaping policies and making decisions, and to do so in a way many would be unwilling to express except privately. These are the considerations justifying a presumptive privilege for presidential communications. The privilege is fundamental to the operation of government and inextricably rooted in the separation of powers under the Constitution." So they recognized the principle of executive privilege, but it denied Richard Nixon's specific privilege claim, basically saying that the tapes didn't involve military or diplomatic secrets, and therefore, quote, "The president's generalized assertion of privilege must yield to the demonstrated specific need for evidence in a pending criminal trial."
Okay.
Which I think makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Time summarized the key points of the case contemporaneously in 1974 by saying the court firmly rejected Nixon's argument that as head of the co-equal executive branch of the government, he was entitled under the Constitution to determine finally the scope of his own privilege. On the contrary, the main theoretical plank of the court's opinion was the assertion of its supremacy in all matters of the law.
Yeah.
But if we take it forward to the present day, it's still unclear how that precedent and that decision applies beyond anything but that specific case.
Right.
So there's still a huge possibility for the idea of executive privilege to be totally exploited because it's still unclear what limits there are to its uses and how it could be enforced. And a lot of scholars worried about that problem as soon as the United States versus Nixon was over, because Chief Justice Burger went to pains to lay out the examples of moments when executive privilege was merited, like military, diplomatic, sensitive national security secrets. It's possible that future presidents could invoke those ideas to hide whatever information they wanted.
Yeah.
And then obviously we know how it worked out for Nixon. The House Judiciary Committee voted to impeach him, and then ultimately he resigned before anything further could happen. And then his vice president, once he took over the presidency, President Ford, pardoned Nixon. So Nixon never actually got in any legal trouble for what happened. Subsequent presidents had, their own relationships with executive privilege. President Clinton claimed executive privilege 14 times to avoid having to testify about the Whitewater scandal in 1995. He also tried to invoke executive privilege to avoid having to testify about Monica Lewinsky, which in that case, he was actually the first president since President Nixon to invoke executive privilege and be denied.
Oh, okay.
George W. Bush invoked executive privilege 6 times, including on behalf of Vice President Dick Cheney when he refused to hand over to a congressional committee documents relating to meetings he had with corporate executives about the administration's energy policies. And in that event, actually, the claim of executive privilege won. Obama invoked executive privilege once over the quote, Operation Fast and Furious in 2012, which was a crazy thing. We don't have time to go into it now, but please do read into it in your own spare time. It has to do with like arms deals. It's kind of crazy. And obviously, Trump's lawyers have argued that he basically has total immunity on the basis of executive privilege. The Supreme Court has disagreed, deciding that, he can't hide his financial records from lawmakers and state authorities. And interestingly, he also tried to claim executive privilege over Robert Mueller's report on the Russia investigation.
Yeah.
And also to hide documents related to the census. There was a big controversy in Donald Trump's first term about a question about citizenship on the census, which obviously would lead a lot of people to just not fill it out. Neither of those attempts by Donald Trump worked, but they were both attempts to expand what executive privilege can apply to. And interestingly, presidents usually, across party lines, back each other up after they've left office over invoking executive privilege. But actually, President Biden told the National Archives to release documents relating to the January 6th congressional investigators, even after Donald Trump tried to claim executive privilege over them. So that was one way that Biden kind of broke with tradition in that kind of unspoken rule.
Okay. Wow. One interesting and knotty topic.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm now excited to see how that plays into the storyline in The West Wing, and whether we see any breaking in the ranks with some people being we should do it, and other people being no, we shouldn't. And whether within our core team there's a really clear stance of people who are for and people who are against. Yeah,
I think it should be really interesting to see how it's applied. And I love that Oliver Babbish is one of his first tenets as he comes in to work on this with Bartlet is we are not doing executive privilege. If you try and invoke it, I'm out.
Yeah, juicy. It's juicy.
And we just love Thomas Jefferson being a petty bitch. A lot of time for it. For it.
Just being I hate him. I hate him. Send him to jail. Leigh, this has been a treat.
Yes, absolutely. I'm excited to do this again next week. Thank you so much, dear listeners, for listening. Please do get in touch. We're queergalswatch@gmail.com. We're at queergalswatch, wherever you get your socials. it is fun if you follow us on Instagram and if you are kind of on our Patreon. Often if I'm kind of mulling over different study session ideas, that's where I kind of put a shout out for any requests. So it's always a fun. And I have to say, I'm always worried about like, oh God, are people going to hate me for this? Are people going to hate me for that? Blah, 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 blah. Classic. But all of our listeners are so lovely. And like our socials and the Discord and the Patreon are everyone is just so nice. So it's just like really lovely. And the Patreon we really appreciate because it just means that we can carry this on.
We can keep doing this. And we love doing this show. And I'm kind of like feeling a bit sad that we're coming to the end of season 2. Like I don't quite know how we're here. But all I can say is, Leigh, I'm thrilled, excited, and on the edge of my seat. To use a Mandyism, I'm psyched.
God rest her soul.
In Mandyland. So shall I see you back here next week?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.